Migrants are found dead in a shipping container in western Libya. As the world prepares to mark the 100th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's birth, a closer look at how his legacy continues to inspire. And a new study reveals the many dangers of dehydration, including the ability to think clearly. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. A grim discovery has been made in Libya. Authorities say 8 migrants, including 6 children, were found dead on Monday after suffocating from gasoline fumes while packed into a refrigerated container truck designed for transporting meat and fish. Security officials in the town of Zuwara say another 90 migrants recovered from the container are now in a local hospital for treatment. Zuwara, located 110 kilometers from Tripoli, is one of the points along Libya's western coastline where smugglers and traffickers hold migrants before loading them onto boats in an attempt to cross the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. The migrants were from multiple sub-Saharan African and Arab countries, as well as Pakistan and Bangladesh. The Zuwara Security Directorate spokesman described the gruesome scene inside the truck.
When we opened the truck, there were almost 100 illegal migrants inside in a very bad and critical health condition due to suffocation. The truck was previously used to transport meat and fish. It was completely shut down and contained many migrants in addition to petrol containers in preparation for a migration to Europe. This resulted in suffocation and panic between the migrants, which resulted in 8 deaths. 80 or 90 were rescued and they are in good health.
Well, smugglers and traffickers have taken advantage of Libya's lawlessness to send hundreds of thousands of migrants to Italy over the past 4 years, although flows have slowed since last summer due to an Italian-backed crackdown on smuggling networks. In South Africa, at least 14,000 people gathered inside a Johannesburg cricket stadium Tuesday to hear former U.S. President Barack Obama deliver a speech on the eve of the 100th anniversary of the birth of anti-apartheid icon Nelson Mandela. Obama told the crowd strongman politics are ascendant suddenly, whereby elections and some pretense of democracy are maintained, the form of it. But those in power seek to undermine every institution or norm that gives democracy meaning. Obama was speaking during the 16th annual Nelson Mandela Lecture. The speech is Obama's highest profile event since leaving the White House in 2017 after 8 years in office. Obama briefly met Mandela in 2005, 3 years before he was elected as the first black U.S. president. He delivered a moving eulogy at Mandela's memorial service in 2013. While Obama's speech also focused on bridging divides and resisting oppression and inequality. For more perspective on the significance of that speech, as well as Obama's relationship with Africa, I'm joined in studio by Grant Harris, CEO of Harris Africa Partners. He was previously President Obama's senior advisor on African affairs in the White House. Mr. Harris, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
So first, let's talk about the speech. Break down a little bit, what you got out of this speech, how significant it was, and what it really means for the continent.
I think the speech was very significant, and it was significant for the continent, but this speech really had global implications. And this was a speech about what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be confronting some of the strongman politics, as you said, that we are seeing really sweep across many countries. And it poses a question that we all need to answer individually. How are we going to confront these trends? How are we going to stand up for the ideals and the values that we hold dear?
Mm-hmm. And we know that President Obama, over the time that he was president, there were expectation just about throughout the continent of what he will do for the continent of Africa. What would you say, in few words, was his legacy, or is his legacy as far as Africa is concerned?
I think President Obama has a strong legacy in a couple of regards. He really focused on youth and supporting young African leaders, which I think is a critical challenge right now. Can African leaders, with the help of international partners, create the jobs and the opportunities for this young population to really thrive and bring back what is needed to their community. And the second issue is he focused on power and broader trade and investment issues, trying to move the focus of policy away from aid and much more towards two-way trade, much more towards increased U.S. investment and the like, with power being a key focus on that, convening and leveraging over $50 billion in public-private partnerships to try to electrify the continent.
Mm-hmm. And, today, or the events of this week, also maybe focusing so much on Nelson Mandela, but people are still thinking about what President Obama himself said during his presidency, that he wanted to create a strong partnership between the continent of Africa and the United States, rather than having this dependency kind of culture where African countries just depend on Western nations. Did he achieve this?
I think that he made real progress. His speech in Ghana in 2009 really hearkened on those themes about mutual respect, mutual responsibility. And the emphasis of his policies and of his engagement was to really try to deepen the relationships, which were long-standing, but also needed more in terms of trade and investment, supporting economic growth, really helping advance these markets, which are obviously quite diverse across the continent and in different stages in terms of attracting capital. I think that in leaving office, he really left an impression, as I mentioned, in putting these issues on the table about youth and power and the challenges of the day, and I think that he made great strides. Is any administration perfect? Absolutely not. In hindsight, there are other things I would have loved to have done as well, but I think it's a proud legacy in terms of engaging the continent, notwithstanding that the expectations when he took office were exceedingly high. I think unrealistic.
And perhaps that was the undoing. I mean, when you look at, for example, in South Africa, there were actually protests against Obama right now. As he went down there, there are some people who thought he shouldn't be the person to give this lecture. What do you think he didn't get right as far as Africa is concerned, such that there are some Africans who still kind of don't feel like they're satisfied with what he did as president and even how he has related with the continent and its people?
It's a great question, and I think we need to unpack two different issues. First is who should deliver a lecture such as this in bringing to bear the legacy and the principles of Nelson Mandela. That's a tall order. And some people may disagree with choices, but I've found that each year, no matter who the choice is, there's some people who disagree and think it should be someone else. Personally, particularly after having heard the speech, I can think of no one better to really have delivered this lecture and to put these issues on the table. I think that's different than what President Obama's legacy is with respect to Africa. This, as I mentioned, is not a speech about U.S.-Africa relations. It's not a speech about U.S.-South Africa relations. And of course, Nelson Mandela is meaningful not only in a South African context and an African context, but as a global icon. And now is precisely the time when we should all be asking ourselves, are we living up to the ideals that he sought to live by? And are we doing what we can and should do as citizens in our own countries to really better our world?
Thank you. And we'll definitely continue that conversation tomorrow, too. I appreciate very much, Grant, for you coming in and sharing your perspectives with us.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Well, Grant Harris is the CEO of Harris Africa Partners. Well, Wednesday, July the 18th, marks the 100th anniversary of Nelson Mandela's birth. It is a chance to reflect on the anti-apartheid leader's life in the second installment of a three-part series. Africa 54's Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick brings us the stories of everyday heroes who are taking Mandela's lessons into their hearts and communities.
One of history's great painters said that art is not what you see, but what you make others see. In New York, a dance troupe is hoping people will see the life of Nelson Mandela in a new way through the art of ballet. The ballet production Madiba, which is Mandela's clan name, portrays his struggle for justice. Through music and movement, we're invited to discover our value and purpose, just as Madiba did.
Madiba is a story that traces Nelson Mandela's life from his birth until his death in the span of 20 minutes.
Believing something you can't see is faith. Believing in someone who believes in something they can't see is trust.
The reason why I particularly was interested in telling the story of Nelson Mandela is because I feel like it's a story that's not often told or talked about in schools. I really wanted to create a ballet that also is going to become an educational component that can facilitate a discussion in schools and in community centers where we can learn a little bit more about Black history. Nelson Mandela was a powerful visionary in the world, and not just for Black people, but just for all people. His views on bringing people together was really compelling, and I really wanted to help bring that story to life on stage within a classical ballet foundation. And that was something that I really wanted to embark on, was creating not a contemporary ballet, not a Revelations, not a modern work, but I really wanted to stay within the classical ballet realm. And the entire team are these amazing visionaries in the arts that just so happen to be Black men. I really wanted to create an outlet for not just ballet dancers to be able to collaborate and share their artistry, but also other Black artists.
I was commissioned by the American Composers Orchestra to write something, and I decided that I just love this man. But it's all about this world coming together, and it's great to be around at a time where a Nelson Mandela can go from being just dirt, you know, to the apartheid government, to being the president of the country.
The story of Nelson Mandela's life is a story of racism and of prejudice, and it almost is parallel to various situations that have happened here in segregation in the South.
So being able to portray a character or portray a person like Nelson Mandela it brings a great deal of pride to me to be able to step into his shoes and to step into, the type of person that he is, so that, I can hopefully one day make the same type of change that he made.
Jeremy McQueen telling this story of Nelson Mandela and using dance and the Kennedy Center stage is a great example of sharing a story of justice. It really relates to what African Americans have experienced in America as well with racism. Using art to share these stories is so incredible. It's something that so many people from different levels of society and different backgrounds can come together and experience in a beautiful way.
The ballet Madiba shows that Nelson Mandela still lives in the hearts of artists whose work is inspired by his example.
Well, joining us tomorrow for part 3 of Haiti's series, we'll see how a knitting project that began inside a prison has grown into a global movement for Nelson Mandela. And here's more on what you can expect this week as Africa 54 commemorates Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday.
As the world celebrates Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday, one of his grandsons, Ndaba Mandela, speaks with Lenore Madu.
He said, Daba, you are Mandela. Therefore, people will look at you as a leader.
In an exclusive interview about life with his grandfather and the lessons he learned from the anti-apartheid icon and Nobel Peace Prize winner. The 2-part series begins on Wednesday, July 18th, only on Africa 54.
Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has predicted an extraordinary relationship between the United States and Russia following a summit in Helsinki Monday with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. But in Europe, there is growing alarm at the President Trump's willingness to build relations with Moscow, even as Russia stands accused of forcefully annexing Crimea from Ukraine and using a nerve agent on British soil to target a former spy, and Ridgewell reports.
A summit that has rattled Europe the president of its closest ally, the United States, on apparent cordial terms with the leader of a nation that many believe poses a clear and present security threat, Russia. Moscow's forceful seizure of Crimea was mentioned in their joint press conference, albeit briefly.
President Trump's stance on Crimea is well known, and he sticks to it. He speaks about illegal attaching of Crimea to the Russian Federation. We have a different point of view. We think that we held a referendum in strict compliance with the international legislation and the United Nations Charter. For us, for the Russian Federation, this question is closed.
There is relief in Kiev and Europe that President Trump did not back his Russian counterpart on Crimea. But the tone of the press conference has alarmed many American allies.
The extent to which he almost went out of his way to not only create some degree of false moral equivalence between EU and Russia and the West and Russia and the United States and Russia, I think that would have struck many. Insofar as this meeting has led anywhere, it's actually away from the Western agenda. It's away from things like trying to encourage Russia to withdraw from its annexation of Crimea.
For President Trump, this was a summit aimed at domestic consumption back home, says former US Ambassador to Russia, Thomas Pickering.
The rest of the world doesn't vote. And his voting public in the United States has stayed with him through this kind of behavior for now a year and 9 months.
The European Union hosted its own summit Monday with Latin American leaders, where there was clear frustration at the US president's approach to his allies.
The US president is seeking to provoke. He is looking to split the European Union. He is referring to us as foes. That is not the way we see it at all.
Despite the strong sentiments, Europe will try to ride out the Trump presidency, says Galeotti.
One of the perverse side effects, benefits of Trump's particular campaign is it may actually force Europe to get more serious, and rather than regarding itself as sheltering behind America, actually coming to the fore in terms of what kind of policy it wants to adopt.
The summit came on the eve of the anniversary of the 2014 downing of Flight MH17, which independent investigators say was shot down by a Russian missile. The fact that Russia has failed to adequately respond to that accusation, added to a growing list of other gross violations of international norms, means few other Western leaders are prepared to follow President Trump's lead in mending ties with Moscow. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered during the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, the many dangers of dehydration. But first, a look at Tuesday's headlines.
In Zimbabwe, opposition movement for democratic change holds a press conference in Harare, alleging that police officers had not been allowed to vote secretly when completing the early postal ballots.
Our officers were asked to vote in the presence of their seniors.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights expresses concern about violence in central Mali.
Communal lines in the Mopti region in central Mali.
In Liberia, President George Weah announces measures to tackle rampant inflation and economic hardship in the country. Former U.S. President Barack Obama is in South Africa meeting with President Cyril Ramaphosa before delivering the 2018 Nelson Mandela Lecture. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.
Well, it's time now for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madu to tell us about a major water project. Lino.
While the International Development Agency WaterAid warned on Monday that supplying clean water and toilets for all could take hundreds of years in countries like Eritrea and Namibia unless governments step up funding to tackle the problem and its harmful effect on health. WaterAid says nearly 850 million people lack clean water globally and predicts that the world will miss a global goal to provide drinking water and adequate sanitation for everyone by 2030. The agency says a significant number of people in 80 countries are unlikely to have access to clean water, while poor sanitation is expected to persist in more than 100 nations. United Nations officials recently said that barriers to achieving the 2030 water and sanitation targets range from conflict and water pollution to climate change and have urged more efficient water use. A new study suggests that dehydration can impair a person's ability to think clearly. Research conducted with athletes found that those who lost a fluid equal to 2% their weight took a hit to their ability, to their cognition. This level of dehydration, the researchers consider mild to moderate, led to attention problems and impaired decision making. They say while the effects weren't huge at 2%, the effects increased with increasing dehydration. In particular, dehydration led to various consequences, including impairment in tasks requiring attention, motor coordination, and grammatical reasoning and mental math. The report was published in Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise. Joining us live via Skype from VOA New York studio is Dr. Dana Cohen, integrative medicine specialist and author of the book Quench. Dr. Cohen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell us about the extent of dehydration on a person's health.
So I want to just make clear, we're not talking about overt dehydration where you're hospitalized because you have heat stroke and you need an IV fluid. We're talking about this chronic low-grade dehydration that the majority of us are suffering from. And it's a big problem because it's not only fatigue, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, or pain all over the place are some of the symptoms, but it could be even bigger things, like it puts you at risk for certain cancers, specifically bladder and colon cancer. Also, it can lead to put you at risk for even diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. So it's a very real issue, and we need to do better.
So it seems like a lot of people are really suffering from dehydration, and sometimes you may not even know, because we tend to associate dehydration with being thirsty, but that is not necessarily the case, right?
Yeah, no, if you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So you need to, other things that you need to look at are, the best thing to look at is the color of your urine. You want your urine to be pale yellow. You don't want it to be bright orange or bright yellow. That means it's concentrated and you're dehydrated. Fatigue, that afternoon fatigue is a great sign to think about hydration first before you maybe reach for that sugar or candy bar. Other things that you can think of, you can pinch the top of your skin, and if it doesn't plump back right down, you're dehydrated. We're meant to urinate every 2 or 3 hours, so that's also another thing to think about. If you haven't urinated in the last 8 hours, you're dehydrated.
Interesting. I just pinched my skin, and it seems to be good so far. So tell us about some ways that we can hydrate. Of course, drinking water. We hear about drinking 8 glasses of water. Is that the only way?
No, and in fact, it's probably not the most effective way.
Okay.
In the book Quench, we talk about, we give you, the more effective way is to eat foods that are rich in a new type of water that's been discovered, and it's a new phase of water. We know that water exists as liquid, ice, and vapor. Now we know that water exists in a gel phase, and that water is the type of water that's in our cells. It's also the type of water that's found in plants and vegetables and certain foods. So the idea of eating your water is what we really talk about, and it's a much more effective way of hydrating than drinking ever more water. We need to drink some water, but there's a better way.
So tell us about some of the foods that perhaps you suggest.
Okay, so we'll talk about a couple foods that I picked out for you today. I want to talk about chia seeds. Chia seeds are the star of the show. Chia seeds, if you've ever put them in water, they create a gel, and they're very hydrating. They help absorb and hold on to that water. They're really good for heart health. They're anti-inflammatory. They help with endurance. There's desert tribes that have been shown to run marathons on chia seeds and water alone. The other thing we can talk about today are lychee seeds, lychee fruit. Lychee fruit is this is the fruit. It's gel. You can see it's gel. It has some water infused in there. It changes the structure of the water.
Okay.
A couple problems with lychee fruit. It's very high in sugar, so I tend to use a supplement that's made from lychee fruit that has all of the benefits of lychee fruit. It protects you from UV radiation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're running out of time, but quickly, we also have fruits like papaya, maybe, and mango that are good in
Great. Papaya, mangoes, any fruits and vegetables. They're all very high. We want a more whole food, fresh fruit diet.
Okay. Dr. Cohen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that was Dr. Dana Cohen. She's an integrative medicine specialist and author of the book Quench. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Vincent, back to you.
All right. I suppose sodas and beer are not an option there. Thanks a lot, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Visually impaired people traveling by car may soon be able to feel the view thanks to a collaboration between an Italian startup and Ford Motor Company. A camera placed inside the device is programmed to take pictures of the view. A shape detection algorithm then analyzes the picture and simplifies it by eliminating tiny details to define the pure forms of the view. This means the system can determine the sea from the sky and from the sun. The picture is then retransmitted to the person using the device through a series of tiny vibrations. Well, next up, a decade ago, Apple opened a store peddling iPhone apps, unlocking the creativity of software developers and letting users truly make their mobile devices their own. The resulting explosion of phone apps, there are now more than 2 million for the iPhone alone, has changed daily life for billions of people worldwide. Apple takes a cut of this action, sometimes as much as 30%. The App Store is now the fastest growing part of Apple's business. Together with other Apple services, the App Store generated $33 billion in revenue over the year that ended in March. And that's what is trending today. Well, and that's our show for today. Thanks a lot for watching. Look forward to seeing you again. From all of us in Washington, have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. So, you know what happy is, and medium comes between small and large.
To find a happy medium.
So, is this idiom about feeling kind of happy?
How is it going with your neighbor? Is he still complaining about your playing the trombone at night?
He was, but it's fine now.
How did you guys work